Nia Ellis was out of time. Her mother's life hung in the balance and $250,000 stood between her and hope. But when she walks into billionaire Grant Kensington's office with a desperate proposal, she never expects him to accept, or that the ruthless tycoon might just be the one who needs saving. Before we get into the story, comment below where in the world you are watching from today. The hospital corridor seemed endless as Nia Ellis rushed toward the intensive care unit. Her worn sneakers squeaked against the polished floor and her heart pounded in her chest. Two nurses glanced up as she passed the station, their faces showing a mix of sympathy and concern. "How is she?" Nia asked, breathless from running all the way from the bus stop. Nurse Jenkins, a kind woman in her 50s who had been caring for Nia's mother for weeks, placed a gentle hand on her shoulder. "She's stable for now, honey. The doctor wants to talk to you, though." Nia's stomach dropped. She knew what that meant. More bad news. She found her mother exactly as she'd left her 12 hours ago when she had rushed home to change for work. Martha Ellis lay still against the white sheets, tubes and wires connecting her to machines that beeped steadily. At 53, Martha looked much older, her once vibrant face now gaunt and pale. "I'm here, Mum," Nia whispered, taking her mother's limp hand. "I got the extra shift at the diner so I can stay with you all morning." Dr. Patel entered the room, clipboard in hand. His expression made Nia brace herself. "Ms. Ellis, we need to discuss your mother's options," he said. "The medication isn't working as well as we'd hoped. Her heart is failing faster than we anticipated." Nia swallowed hard. "What about the surgery you mentioned before? The valve replacement is still the best option, but as I explained." He hesitated. "The insurance won't cover it," Nia finished for him. "I know, I've been calling them every day." Dr. Patel nodded. "Without the surgery, I'm afraid we're looking at weeks, maybe a month. I'm sorry." After he left, Nia sat beside her mother, fighting back tears. Martha Ellis had worked 2 jobs her entire life to raise Nia after her father abandoned them. She'd never complained, never asked for help, and now when she needed it most, the system was failing her because of money. "I'm going to fix this, Mom," Nia promised. "I don't know how, but I will." Later that afternoon, Nia sat in the hospital cafeteria, surrounded by crumpled papers and a calculator. No matter how she added up her savings, tips, and potential loans, she couldn't come close to the $250,000 needed for her mother's surgery. She absent-mindedly stirred her cold coffee while flipping through a discarded newspaper. A headline caught her eye. "Kensington Enterprises CEO makes Forbes 400 list again." The photo showed Grant Kensington III, tall, imposing, and impeccably dressed, looking down at the camera with cold eyes. The article described his recent business acquisitions and mentioned his status as one of the city's most eligible bachelors, despite his notorious aversion to relationships. Nia was about to turn the page when a smaller article below caught her attention. "Kensington faces citizenship challenge." According to the piece, the business tycoon's visa status was in question, and he needed to secure permanent residency within 3 months or risk losing control of his American holdings. An idea, desperate and wild, formed in Nia's mind. She'd heard of contract marriages before, arrangements where U.S. citizens married immigrants for money. It was illegal, she knew that, but people did it anyway. "This is crazy," she muttered to herself. But as she looked up at the ICU floor where her mother lay dying, Nia knew she had run out of options. The Kensington Enterprises headquarters towered over the city skyline, all glass and steel. Nia stood outside, clutching her worn purse, feeling ridiculously out of place in her simple dress and jacket, the nicest outfit she owned. "You can do this," she whispered to herself before pushing through the revolving doors. The security guard at the front desk looked her up and down suspiciously. "Can I help you, miss?" "I need to see Mr. Kensington," Nia said, trying to sound confident. The guard chuckled. "Do you have an appointment?" "No, but it's urgent. Tell him it's about his citizenship issue." The guard's smile faded. He picked up the phone and spoke quietly, then nodded. "Wait here." 15 minutes later, a stern-looking woman in a sharp suit approached. "I'm Amanda Wells, Mr. Kensington's executive assistant." "What's this about?" "I need..." To speak to Mr. Kensington personally, Nia insisted. It's a private matter that could benefit him greatly. Amanda's eyes narrowed. Mr. Kensington doesn't see anyone without an appointment, especially not... She paused, giving Nia's appearance a quick assessment, especially not someone like me. Nia finished for her. Tell him I have a solution to his immigration problem, one that won't involve his lawyers or the press. Something in Nia's determined expression must have convinced Amanda. Wait here, she said before disappearing into an elevator. 10 minutes later, Nia found herself being escorted to the top floor of the building. The elevator opened directly into a vast office with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city. Behind an enormous desk sat Grant Kensington III. He looked even more intimidating in person than in photographs. Tall and broad-shouldered, with dark hair and piercing blue eyes, he emanated power and control. He didn't stand when Nia entered. You have 2 minutes, he said without looking up from his computer. Nia took a deep breath. I have a proposition for you, Mr. Kensington. If you're selling something, I'm not interested. I'm selling myself, Nia said bluntly. That got his attention. His head snapped up, eyes narrowing. Excuse me. Not like that, Nia quickly clarified. I'm offering a marriage. 1 year, no strings attached. You get your green card and I get... Get out, he interrupted, turning back to his computer. My mother is dying, Nia continued desperately. She needs heart surgery that costs $250,000. Insurance won't cover it. I need the money, and you need citizenship. It's a fair trade. Grant leaned back in his chair, studying her with cold calculation. And why would I choose you when I could hire the best immigration lawyers in the country? Because even the best lawyers can't guarantee results, especially with the current administration's crackdown on visa applications. A marriage to an American citizen is certain, and I'm not looking for anything beyond the money for my mother's surgery. Once she's better and your green card is secure, we can quietly divorce. Grant stood and walked around his desk. He was easily a foot taller than Nia, but she refused to be intimidated. What's your name? He asked. Nia Ellis. He circled her, slowly like a predator assessing prey. No criminal record, no hidden scandals? No, I work as a waitress and take night classes at the community college. I'm boring and respectable. And what makes you think I would trust you? What's to stop you from demanding more money once we're married? Nya met his gaze directly. I'll sign anything you want. This isn't about getting rich or taking advantage. It's just about saving my mother. Something shifted in Grant's expression. Not warmth exactly, but perhaps a glimmer of respect. Amanda, he called, and his assistant appeared instantly. Get Peterson from legal up here and have someone run a background check on Ms. Ellis. Does this mean you're considering it? Nia asked cautiously. Grant returned to his desk. It means I'm not having you thrown out yet. Wait outside. Sized to 3 hours later, Nia sat across from Grant and his lawyer in a conference room. She'd been photographed, fingerprinted, and questioned extensively. Now a contract lay on the table between them. The terms are simple, said Peterson. A balding man with glasses. You will marry Mr. Kensington within the week. You will live in his home for 1 year and accompany him to necessary social and business functions as his wife. You will sign a non-disclosure agreement. In return, Mr. Kensington will pay for your mother's medical expenses and provide you with a monthly stipend. I don't need a stipend, Nia clarified. Just my mother's surgery and care. Grant raised an eyebrow. Most people would ask for more. I'm not most people. I just want my mother to live. Grant studied her for a long moment. The surgery will be arranged at Manhattan Methodist. They have an excellent cardiac unit. You'll move into my home this weekend. We marry on Monday. That fast? Nia asked, suddenly overwhelmed by how quickly. Her desperate idea was becoming reality. Immigration officials are reviewing my case next month. We need to establish our relationship immediately. He pushed the contract toward her. Sign it if you agree. Nia's hand trembled slightly as she took the pen. Can I tell my mother the truth? No, Grant said firmly. As far as anyone is concerned, we met 3 months ago and had a whirlwind romance. The fewer people who know the truth, the better. Nia nodded and signed her name. As Grant added his signature, she couldn't help but wonder what she had just gotten herself into. By Saturday, Martha Ellis had been transferred to Manhattan Methodist Hospital under the care of one of the top cardiac surgeons in the country. Nia sat beside her mother's bed, holding her hand as the doctor explained the procedure scheduled for Monday morning. "It's a miracle," Martha whispered after the doctor left. "How did you manage this, honey?" Nia forced a smile. "I met someone. Mom, someone special who wants to help us." "A man?" Martha's eyes widened. "Why haven't you mentioned him before?" "It happened fast," Nia said, the lie bitter on her tongue. "His name is Grant Kensington. We're getting married." Martha looked shocked. "Married? Nia, you've never even mentioned dating anyone." "I know it seems sudden, but when you know, you know." Nia squeezed her mother's hand. "He's taking care of the hospital bills. He wants to help." "Kensington, why is that name familiar?" Martha's brow furrowed. "He's a businessman, quite successful." Nia changed the subject quickly. "The important thing is your surgery, Mum. The doctor says your chances are excellent." Later that afternoon, Nia packed her few belongings into a single suitcase. Her apartment, a tiny studio she could barely afford, looked bare even with most of her things still in it. She told her landlord she was moving out and given notice at the diner. At precisely 5 p.m., a sleek black car pulled up outside her building. The driver, a man in a dark suit, loaded her suitcase into the trunk without a word. As the car pulled away from the curb, Nia looked back at the life she was leaving behind. By this time tomorrow, she would be living in a mansion with a man she barely knew, preparing to become his wife, a man who had bought her, just as surely as if they'd signed a bill of sale instead of a marriage contract. The iron gates of the Kensington estate opened as the car approached. Nia stared wide-eyed at the sprawling mansion that came into view. It was bigger than she had imagined, a massive structure of stone and glass perched on a hill overlooking the city. The car stopped at the front entrance, where Amanda Wells, Grant's assistant, waited with a tablet in hand. "Welcome, Miss Ellis," she said without warmth. "Mr. Kensington is in a meeting, but I'll show you to your room and review the schedule for tomorrow." Ness followed Amanda through the massive front doors into a grand foyer with a sweeping staircase. Everything looked expensive and untouchable, from the crystal chandelier to the marble floors. "This place is like a museum," Nia commented. "Kensington values order and perfection," Amanda replied. "Your room is this way." They climbed the stairs to the second floor, passing through corridors decorated with artwork that probably cost more than Nia would earn in 10 lifetimes. "This is your suite," Amanda said, opening double doors to reveal a sitting room larger than Nia's entire apartment. Beyond it was a bedroom with a 4-poster bed and floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking manicured gardens. The bathroom is through there, and the dressing room is on the left. Mr. Kensington had some appropriate clothes delivered for you. Amanda's tone made it clear what she thought of Nia's current wardrobe. Appropriate for what? For being Mrs. Kensington, of course. Your marriage takes place tomorrow at 11 a.m. in Mr. Kensington's private office downtown. A judge will perform the ceremony with the minimum required witnesses. Afterward, you'll attend a lunch with some of Mr. Kensington's business associates. So soon? Nia hadn't expected to be thrust into the role immediately. The sooner people see you as a couple, the more convincing it will be. Amanda handed her the tablet. "This is your schedule. Study it. You'll find information about Mr. Kensington's businesses, his associates, and his preferences. Memorize it all. His preferences, what he likes to eat, his daily routine, how he takes his coffee, details a wife would know. Immigration officials will check these things during interviews." Nia took the tablet, feeling overwhelmed. "When will I see him?" "Mr. Kensington will join you for dinner at 8 p.m. Be ready and dressed appropriately." With that, Amanda left, closing the doors behind her. Left alone, Nia wandered around the suite, touching the silk bedspread and staring at her reflection in the ornate mirror. She looked out of place, like a street cat that had wandered into the palace. In the dressing room, she found racks of clothes in her size. Dresses, suits, shoes, everything with designer labels still attached. The sight of so much excess when she'd spent her life scraping by made her uneasy. After showering in a bathroom larger than her kitchen, Nia chose the simplest outfit she could find, a navy blue dress with a modest neckline. As she dressed, She reminded herself why she was here. Her mother's surgery was scheduled for tomorrow morning, and that was all that mattered. Precisely at 8 p.m., Nia made her way downstairs, following a staff member's directions to the dining room. Grant was already seated at the head of a table long enough for 20 people. He didn't stand when she entered. "You're punctual." "Good," he said, barely looking up from his phone. "Thank you for the clothes," Nia said, taking the seat a butler pulled out for her. "Though it seems excessive." "It's necessary. My wife can't look like she shops at discount stores." Nia bit back a retort. This was a business arrangement, she reminded herself. "I visited my mother today. Thank you for arranging her transfer and the surgery." Grant nodded curtly as servers brought in the first course, some kind of soup Nia didn't recognize. "We should discuss how this arrangement will work," he said after the servers departed. "In public, you will act as my devoted wife. You'll accompany me to business functions and charity events. You'll learn to conduct yourself appropriately in social situations." "I know how to behave in public," Nia said, bristling at his condescending tone. "In my circles? I doubt it." Grant took a sip of wine. "You'll also need to learn about my business interests for convincing conversation." "Amanda gave me a tablet full of information. I'll study it." "Good. At home, we'll maintain separate routines. Your suite is your domain. Mine is off limits unless I invite you. We'll share meals when necessary, especially if staff are present." Nia nodded, trying the soup. It was delicious, but she couldn't enjoy it under Grant's critical gaze. "What about your family?" she asked. "Won't they find this sudden marriage suspicious?" "My parents are dead. I have a younger sister, Victoria, who lives in Europe. She's used to my unexpected decisions." He studied Nia for a moment. "Tell me about yourself. The background check was thorough, but I prefer to hear it from you." Nia put down her spoon. "What do you want to know?" "Your education, your work history, your previous relationships, anything that might come up in conversation." "I graduated high school with honors but couldn't afford college right away. I've been taking night classes in business administration while working full-time at a diner. My father left when I was 7. It's been just my mother and me since then." She paused. "No serious relationships. I haven't had time for dating." Grant nodded, processing this information like he was reviewing a business proposal. "No skeletons in the closet? No ex-boyfriends who might show up with stories to sell?" "No. My life isn't that interesting. It's about to become interesting." Grant's phone buzzed and he checked it. "Tomorrow after the ceremony, we'll have lunch with Richard Carlyle and his wife. He's a key investor and sits on the board of Kensington Enterprises. They've been asking to meet my partner for months." "You've been telling people you're in a relationship?" "It seemed prudent given my immigration situation. I mentioned dating an American woman some time ago. Now we've simply accelerated the timeline." The rest of dinner passed in uncomfortable silence, broken only by Grant's occasional business calls. By the time dessert arrived, a delicate pastry Nia barely touched, she felt exhausted from the tension. "I should check on my mother," she said, standing. "Her surgery is early." "Tomorrow." Grant glanced at his watch. "The car will take you to the hospital at 7 a.m. Be back by 10:30 for the ceremony." "I want to be there when she wakes up from surgery." "That's not possible. We have the ceremony at 11 and lunch with the Carlyles at 1 p.m. "My mother's surgery is the whole reason I'm doing this," Nia said, her voice rising. "I need to be there." Grant's expression hardened. "The deal was that I pay for the surgery. I didn't agree to rearrange my schedule around it." Nia felt anger bubbling up. "You really are heartless, aren't you? It's just business to you. Everything and everyone is just a transaction." For a moment, something flashed in Grant's eyes, perhaps surprised that she dared speak to him this way. Then his face closed up again. "You're right. This is a transaction. I'm purchasing your presence and cooperation for 1 year. In exchange, your mother gets the best medical care money can buy. If that arrangement no longer suits you, say so now before we make it official." Nia knew she was trapped. She needed this deal more than he did. "It suits me," she said quietly, "but I want to see my mother tomorrow after the surgery." "It can be after your lunch." Grant considered this. "Fine, we'll visit the hospital together after meeting with the Carlyles. It will look appropriate, a devoted daughter introducing her new husband to her mother." Nia nodded. too tired to argue further. "Good night, Mr. Kensington." "You should start calling me Grant," he said, as she turned to leave. Mrs. Kensington. The next morning passed in a blur. Naya spent an hour at the hospital before her mother was taken to surgery, promising to return later. The surgical team was confident, assuring her that Martha was in good hands. The wedding ceremony, if it could be called that, was cold and businesslike. In a private room at Kensington Enterprises, a judge performed the brief civil ceremony. Amanda and the company lawyer served as witnesses. Naya wore a simple white dress that had appeared in her closet overnight, while Grant wore his usual impeccable suit. When the judge pronounced them husband and wife, Grant placed a platinum ring on Naya's finger. It fit perfectly, making her wonder when he'd had time to determine her size. There was no kiss, no celebration. The judge and witnesses left, and Amanda immediately handed Naya a folder of documents, her new identification as Mrs. Kensington. "Congratulations," Grant said dryly. "We have 30 minutes before we need to leave for lunch." Nya stared at the ring on her finger, feeling the weight of what she'd done. It doesn't feel real. It doesn't need to feel real. It just needs to look real. Grant checked his phone. "Your mother's surgery is going well. I had my assistant check." The gesture surprised Naya. "Thank you." Grant nodded, his expression unreadable. "The Carlyles are important to my business. Richard's wife, Eleanor, is particularly perceptive. She'll be watching us closely for any signs that this marriage isn't genuine." "What's our story? How did we meet?" 3 months ago, at a charity fundraiser, you were working at the event, and I was impressed by your directness. We began dating discreetly, and I proposed last month." "Fast romance," Naya commented. "I'm known for making quick decisions when I see value." Grant's eyes met hers. "Remember, for the next year, you're no longer Naya Ellis, the waitress. You're Mrs. Kensington, my wife and partner." The restaurant was private and exclusive, with panoramic views of the city. Richard Carlyle, a distinguished man in his 60s, and his elegant wife, Eleanor, were already seated when Grant and Naya arrived. "Grant, finally we meet the woman who captured the uncapturable bachelor." Richard stood, shaking Grant's hand warmly before turning to Naya. "Mrs. Kensington, a pleasure." "Please call me Naya," she said, smiling despite her nerves. Eleanor Carlyle studied Naya with curious eyes. "Grant has been so secretive about you. Tell us, my dear, how did you manage to snare our confirmed bachelor?" Before Nia could answer, Grant placed his hand over hers on the table. "Naya didn't give me much choice," he said, with unexpected warmth in his voice. "She's not easily intimidated." "That must be refreshing for you," Eleanor said with a knowing smile. "Most people either fear Grant or want something from him. I wanted nothing from him except honesty," Naya replied, surprised at how easily the words came, "and respect." Grant's hand tightened slightly over hers. "Which is precisely why I married her." Throughout lunch, Naya was amazed at Grant's transformation. The cold, detached businessman was gone, replaced by an attentive husband who seemed genuinely interested in her opinions. He asked about her community college studies, praising her ambition in front of the Carlyles. "Nia has a remarkable understanding of people," he told Richard when business came up. "She's already given me valuable perspective on the Westlake project." "Is that so?" Richard looked intrigued. "What perspective is that, Nia?" Caught off guard, Naya recalled something she'd read on the tablet. "The Westlake development impacts a working-class neighborhood. Grant mentioned the resistance from local businesses, and I suggested involving them in the planning process rather than simply buying them out." Grant nodded approvingly. "It's going to save us months of community pushback and bad press." By dessert, even Eleanor seemed convinced, leaning over to whisper to Naya, "I've known Grant for 15 years, and I've never seen him look at anyone the way he looks at you." Nia smiled, wondering what Eleanor would think if she knew the truth. As promised, Grant accompanied Naya to the hospital after lunch. Martha was still in recovery, but the surgeon reported that the operation had been a complete success. "She'll need to stay in the hospital for about a week, then several weeks of home care and rehabilitation," the doctor explained, "but her prognosis is excellent." Relief washed over Naya, bringing unexpected tears. "Thank you," she whispered. When the doctor left them alone in the waiting area, Grant handed Naya a tissue. "You've upheld your end of the bargain admirably today," he said. "The Carlyles were completely convinced." "You were." Naya hesitated, wiping her eyes. Different with them. Almost human. A flicker of amusement crossed Grant's face. "I'm capable of charm when business requires it. Is that what I am? Business?" Grant considered her for a moment. "You're an investment in my future, and I always protect my investments." A nurse approached them. "Mrs. Ellis is awake now, you can see her briefly." Nia stood, then hesitated, looking at Grant. "Go ahead," he said. "I'll wait here." Martha looked pale but alert when Naya entered the recovery room. Her eyes widened at the sight of her daughter. "There's my girl," she said weakly. "The doctor says they fixed my heart good as new." "That's wonderful, Mom." Nia took her mother's hand, careful of the IV line. Martha's eyes fixed on the ring on Naya's finger. "So you really did it? You married that man?" "Yes. This morning." Nia forced a smile. "He's here, actually. Would you like to meet him?" Before Martha could answer, Grant appeared in the doorway, his tall frame filling the space. He approached the bed with unexpected gentleness. "Mrs. Ellis, I'm Grant Kensington. I want you to know that you have nothing to worry about. Your recovery and care are completely taken care of." Martha studied him with a mother's scrutinizing gaze. "My daughter says you two fell in love quickly." "When you know, you know," Grant replied smoothly, placing his hand on Naya's shoulder. The touch startled her, but she didn't pull away. "Take care of her," Martha said firmly, despite her weakened state. "Naya has spent her whole life taking care of others. It's about time someone looked after her." Grant's hand tightened slightly on Naya's shoulder. "I intend to." Outside in the hallway, after saying goodbye to Martha, Naya turned to Grant. "Thank you for coming in. That meant a lot to her." Grant nodded. "Your mother is a strong woman. I can see where you get it from." The unexpected compliment caught Naya off guard. Before she could respond, Grant's phone rang. He checked the screen and frowned. "I need to take this. The car will take you home whenever you're ready." He stepped away to answer the call, immediately transforming back into the cold businessman. Nia watched him walk away, realizing that she had just begun the strangest year of her life, pretending to be in love with a man who saw people as nothing more than entries in a ledger. Yet something about the way he had spoken to her mother made her wonder if there might be more to Grant Kensington than spreadsheets and profit margins. Only time would tell. 1 month into their marriage, Naya stood at the window of her suite, watching the rain streak down the glass. Outside, gardeners worked despite the weather, maintaining the perfect landscape of the Kensington estate. Perfect, just like everything else in Grant's world. Perfect and cold. Her mother was recovering well at a rehabilitation facility, another expense Grant had covered without comment. Nia visited her daily, carefully maintaining the charade of happy newlywed whenever staff was present. "He's just so busy with work," she would explain when Martha asked why Grant rarely accompanied her. "But he asks about you every day." The lie tasted bitter, but it was easier than the truth, that most days Nia barely saw her husband. Their interactions were limited to occasional dinners and public appearances, where Grant played the role of devoted spouse with surprising skill. Knock at her door interrupted her thoughts. She opened it to find Amanda. "Mr. Kensington requests your presence at dinner tonight," the assistant said crisply. "You'll be hosting the Japanese investment team. Wear the red dress from Valentino, hair up, subtle makeup." Nia bit back a retort about being ordered around like staff. "What time?" 7:30. "Mr. Kensington suggests you review the file on Tanaka Industries before the dinner." Amanda handed her a tablet. "Also, immigration officials called. They've scheduled your first interview next week." This caught Naya's attention. "What kind of interview?" "Standard procedure for marriage-based green card applications. They'll question you both separately about your relationship. Be prepared." With that, Amanda left. Nia spent the afternoon studying the Tanaka file and the immigration questions Amanda had provided. By evening, she was dressed in the specified red gown, her dark hair swept into an elegant updo. When she descended the stairs, she found Grant waiting in the foyer. He wore a perfectly tailored black suit, his expression unreadable as always. But something in his eyes changed when he saw her, a brief flicker of appreciation. "You look appropriate," he said. "Such a charmer," Nia replied dryly. The corner of Grant's mouth twitched, almost a smile. "The Tanakas are traditional. They respect hierarchy and proper behavior. Follow my lead." "Don't I always?" Grant studied her for a moment. "Actually, no. You have a habit of speaking your mind, which is refreshing in private but can be problematic in business settings. I'll try to be a proper trophy wife tonight." "That's not what I want," Grant said, surprising her. "These men respect authenticity. Just be yourself, within reason." The dinner went better than Nia expected. The Japanese businessmen were formal but friendly, especially Mr. Tanaka himself, an older man with kind eyes. "Mrs. Kensington," he said during dessert, "your husband tells me you are studying business administration." "Yes, part-time," Nia replied. "I'm particularly interested in how businesses can balance profit with community impact." Tanaka nodded approvingly. "In Japan, we believe a business must serve society, not just shareholders. Your husband's new community development approach to the Westlake project reflects this philosophy." Nia glanced at Grant, surprised. "Yes, involving local businesses rather than displacing them. An idea I believe came from you," Tanaka said with a smile. Grant nodded. "My wife has valuable perspective I previously overlooked." After the guests departed, Nia helped the staff clear some dishes, ignoring their protests. When she returned to the dining room, she found Grant still seated, watching her with an odd expression. "Did I say something wrong?" she asked. "No. You were perfect." He paused. "Too perfect, perhaps." "Tanaka asked if you would consider joining our next meeting. He believes your fresh eyes would be valuable." Nia raised an eyebrow. "And you told him?" "That I would discuss it with you." Grant stood, adjusting his cuffs. "We have the immigration interview next week. We should prepare." Amanda gave me the questions. "Questions are the easy part. We need to appear as a genuine couple." He hesitated. "We need to know more about each other. Personal details." "Like what?" "Like how you take your coffee, your favorite books, whether you sleep on the left or right." "Side of the bed," Nia laughed. "Immigration officers aren't going to ask which side of the bed I sleep on." "They might. And we've never shared a bed." The statement hung in the air between them, suddenly heavy with implication. "I sleep on the left," Nia said finally. "And I like my coffee with just a little milk, no sugar." Grant nodded. "I sleep on the right, black coffee." "Shocking," Nia said with a small smile. "The man who runs on spreadsheets and profit margins takes his coffee black." That almost smile appeared again on Grant's face. "We should spend more time together this week. Make it convincing. Convincing enough to fool government officials, convincing enough to fool anyone." The week that followed was strange. Grant began joining Nia for breakfast each morning. They took walks around the grounds, during which he asked about her childhood, her dreams, her favorite memories. He shared little in return, but he listened to her stories with genuine interest. One evening they sat in his study reviewing their relationship timeline when Grant asked, "Why did you never pursue college full-time?" "Money," Nia said simply. "Mom got sick the first time when I was 18. Medical bills took everything we had saved for my education. What would you have studied?" "Business still, but with a focus on non-profit management." She smiled wistfully. "I wanted to start a foundation to help families dealing with medical crises, people who fall through the cracks of the system." Grant looked thoughtful. "That's still possible. You could finish your degree now." "Taking night classes while playing society wife?" "I don't think so." "Why not? You're clearly intelligent. It would be a waste not to pursue your education." Nia studied him, surprised by his interest. "Maybe after our arrangement ends. For now, I'm focused on helping my mother recover." Grant nodded, then hesitated before asking, "Would you like to visit her together tomorrow before the interview?" The request caught Nia off guard. "Why?" "Immigration officials often contact family members. Your mother should see us together. interacting like a normal couple. Right, of course. Naya tried to hide her disappointment at the practical reason. That makes sense. Martha Ellis looked much better than she had a month ago. Color had returned to her cheeks, and she was sitting up in a chair when Nia and Grant arrived at the rehabilitation center. "There's my daughter and her mysterious husband." Martha's face lit up. "I was beginning to think he was avoiding me." "Business has been demanding," Grant said smoothly, taking the chair next to Martha's. "But I wanted to see your progress for myself." "And check if I'm worth the investment?" Martha asked shrewdly. Grant looked startled, then laughed. An actual laugh that transformed his face completely. "I see where Naya gets her directness." "She's always been too honest for her own good," Martha agreed. "Never could tell a lie." Without blushing, she fixed her gaze on Grant. "So tell me, what made you fall for my daughter? And don't give me that love-at-first-sight nonsense." Nia tensed, but Grant seemed unfazed. "It wasn't first sight," he said. "It was first conversation. Nia challenged me in a way no one had in years. She didn't care about my money or my position. She just saw me." He glanced at Naya. "That's rare in my world." The sincerity in his voice was so convincing that even Naya almost believed him. Martha studied them both for a long moment, then nodded. "Well, she's always been a good judge of character. If she chose you, there must be something worthwhile beneath that fancy suit." Later, as they walked to the car, Nia said, "You're very good at this. For a moment, even I believed you were in love with me." Grant opened the car door for her. "That's the point, isn't it?" The immigration office was sterile and unwelcoming. Naya and Grant sat side by side in a waiting room, surrounded by other couples in similar situations. "Mr. and Mrs. Kensington?" A stern-looking woman appeared at a door. "I'm Officer Garcia. We'll be conducting your interview separately. Mrs. Kensington, you'll come with me. Mr. Kensington, my colleague will be with you shortly." Nia followed Officer Garcia to a small office with a desk and 2 chairs. The woman gestured for her to sit, then opened a file. "This is a standard procedure for all marriage-based green card applications," she explained. "I'll ask you questions about your relationship. Your husband will be asked the same questions separately. Any significant discrepancies will raise concerns about the validity of your marriage." Nia nodded, trying to appear calm. "How did you meet Mr. Kensington?" "At a charity fundraiser 3 months ago. I was working the event, and he was a donor." "And when did you start dating?" "That night. He asked for my number." The questions continued, basic at first, then increasingly detailed. Nia recited the practiced answers, adding small, unplanned details to make them more convincing. "What side of the bed does your husband sleep on?" "The right," Nia answered, remembering their conversation. "Does he have any birthmarks or scars?" Nia hesitated. She and Grant hadn't discussed this. "He has a small scar on his left shoulder, from a sailing accident when he was younger." The officer made a note, and Nia prayed she'd guessed correctly. "What does he usually eat for breakfast?" "Nothing, usually, just black coffee. He's not a morning person." "When did you know you wanted to marry him?" The question caught Nia off guard. They hadn't prepared for something so subjective. "It wasn't a specific moment," she said slowly. "It was more a gradual realization that I felt safe with him. Not because of his money or position, but because underneath all that there's someone solid and reliable. Someone who sees me clearly." She was surprised by how true the words felt. After 45 minutes, the interview concluded. Nia was escorted to another waiting room to wait for Grant. When he finally appeared, his face revealed nothing. "How did it go?" she asked once they were in the car. "Fine. You?" "I think okay. I had to guess about the scar on your shoulder." Grant glanced at her. "Lucky guess. I do have a scar there." "From a sailing accident?" "From a broken bottle. My father threw it during one of his rages." Grant's voice was flat, matter-of-fact. Nia stared at him, shocked by this glimpse into his past. "I'm sorry, I didn't know." "Why would you? It's not in any of the company bios." "Your father was violent?" Grant's hands tightened on the steering wheel. "He was a drunk, brilliant businessman, terrible human being." "Is that why you don't drink? I've noticed you only have water at dinners." Grant looked surprised that she'd noticed. Partly. Also, I prefer to stay in control. They drove in silence for a while before Naya asked, "Do you think we passed the interview?" "Yes." Officer Wilson seemed satisfied. "We should hear within a few weeks." When they arrived home, Grant paused before they entered the house. "Naya, thank you. For today." It was the first time he'd thanked her for anything related to their arrangement. "It's what you're paying me for," she replied, instantly regretting the words when she saw his face close up again. "Of course. Good night, Mrs. Kensington." 2 weeks later, Grant's green card was approved. He brought the news to Naya as she sat in the garden reading. "Congratulations," she said. "Half of our contract is fulfilled." "Indeed." Grant sat beside her on the bench. "How is your mother?" "Better every day. The doctors say she can move to my apartment next month." Grant frowned. "Your former apartment, you gave it up. So I'm looking for a new place for her, something with an elevator and better security." "That won't be necessary. She can stay in the guest house here." Nia looked at him in surprise. "Why would you do that?" "It's practical. She needs ongoing care, and there's staff here to help. Also, it would look strange if my mother-in-law lived elsewhere when we have plenty of space." "So it's about appearances, isn't everything?" Grant stood. "I have a charity gala tonight. Amanda laid out a gown for you." Another command performance as the devoted wife. Grant's expression hardened slightly. "If you prefer not to attend, I can make excuses." "No, I'll go. It's what you're paying me for, right?" Something flickered in Grant's eyes, hurt perhaps, though Naya couldn't be sure. "The car leaves at 7, he said, turning to leave. After he was gone, Nia sighed. She didn't understand why she kept reminding him of their arrangement. Perhaps it was easier than acknowledging the confusion she felt whenever he showed glimpses of humanity, like offering a home to her mother or listening to her dreams of education. That night at the gala, Naya played her role perfectly. She smiled at the right moments, laughed at the right jokes, and stood proudly by Grant's side as he accepted an award for corporate philanthropy. "None of this would be possible without my wife's influence," he said in his acceptance speech, his hand warm at the small of her back. "Naya reminds me daily that true success is measured not in profits, but in positive impact." The crowd applauded, and Nia stared at him, wondering how much of the statement was performance and how much might be sincere. Later, as they danced, Grant pulled her closer than usual. "You look beautiful tonight," he murmured. "Thank you," she said, conscious of his hand on her waist, the subtle scent of his cologne. "You give a good speech, very convincing." "Not everything I say about you is for show, Naya." Before she could respond, they were interrupted by Richard Carlyle. "Grant, just the man I needed to see. Sorry to interrupt your dance, but there's someone you must meet." Grant nodded, releasing Naya. "I'll be right back," he promised, but he didn't return. Caught in a series of business conversations, he remained across the room for the rest of the evening. Nia didn't mind. It gave her time to compose herself, to remember that this marriage was a business arrangement, nothing more. She was just beginning to consider finding Grant to leave when a striking blonde woman approached her. "So you're the famous Naya," the woman said, her British accent crisp and clear. "I've been dying to meet you." "I'm sorry, have we been introduced?" Nia asked. "Not yet, I'm Victoria Kensington." The woman's smile didn't reach her eyes. "Grant's sister." Nia's heart sank. Grant had mentioned his sister lived in Europe. Hadn't mentioned she would be visiting. "Victoria, it's lovely to meet you. Grant didn't tell me you were in town." He didn't know. "I wanted to surprise him." Victoria sipped her champagne. "And meet the woman who convinced my marriage-phobic brother to settle down after knowing her for, what was it? 3 months. Her tone made it clear she didn't believe the timeline. "Sometimes you just know," Nia said, repeating the line she and Grant had practiced. Victoria laughed. "Oh, darling. Grant doesn't do romance. He does strategy." She leaned closer. "So what's your angle? What made my brother decide he suddenly needed an American wife?" Before Nia could respond, Grant appeared at her side. "Victoria, this is unexpected." His voice was cool, his arm possessive around Nia's waist. "Hello, brother dear, I was just getting to know your bride." Victoria's smile was shark-like. "Quite the whirlwind romance, I hear." We were just leaving, Grant said firmly. Dinner. Tomorrow? We can catch up properly. I'll look forward to it. Victoria kissed his cheek, then whispered something in his ear that made his jaw tighten. In the car, Grant was silent, his expression dark. Your sister seems interesting, Nia ventured. Victoria thrives on drama. Ignore whatever she said. To you. She seems suspicious of our marriage. She's suspicious of everything. Grant sighed. She'll be staying for a week. We'll need to be convincing. More convincing than we've been so far. Grant looked at her directly. Yes, much more. Convincing. The intensity of his gaze sent an unexpected shiver through Nia. What does that mean exactly? It means Victoria will be watching us closely, looking for cracks. She has a talent for discovering secrets. His hand found hers in the darkness of the car. We'll need to appear truly intimate. The word hung between them, intimate, with all its implications. I see, Nia said, her mouth suddenly dry. Grant's thumb traced circles on the back of her hand. Can you do that, Nia? Can you make everyone, including my sister, believe that what's between us is real? In that moment, with his touch sending warmth up her arm and his eyes holding hers, Nia wasn't sure what was real anymore. Yes, she whispered. I can do that. What she didn't say, what she hardly dared admit to herself, was that she was no longer entirely sure she would be acting. Victoria Kensington's presence transformed the mansion. Suddenly, the quiet, ordered household became a stage for her dramatic entrances and exits, her laugh echoing through rooms that had known only hushed conversations. This place is exactly as gloomy as I remember, Victoria declared over breakfast on her first morning. Honestly, Nia, how do you stand it? It's like living in a museum. Grant, reading financial reports at the head of the table, didn't look up. Not everyone needs constant chaos to feel alive, Victoria. No, some people need no life at all. Victoria winked at Nia. Has he shown you his color-coded closet yet? Everything arranged by shade and season. Despite herself, Nia smiled. I assumed his assistant did that. Oh, no, that's all, Grant. Control freak from the cradle. Victoria buttered her toast. So, newlyweds, how's married life? Nia felt Grant's eyes on her. Adjustment period, she said carefully. But good. Victoria raised an eyebrow. Adjustment period. That doesn't sound very romantic. What, Nia? Means, Grant interjected, reaching for her hand across the table, is that we're learning to blend our lives. My schedule isn't always easy to work around. The casual intimacy of his touch still startled Nia, though they'd agreed to increase these gestures during Victoria's visit. Speaking of schedules, Grant continued, I have meetings until noon, but I'm free this afternoon if you'd like to visit your mother. Nia nodded. She'd like that. She's been asking about you. Domestic bliss, Victoria commented, her tone skeptical. Never thought I'd see the day. Over the next few days, Grant and Nia maintained a careful performance. They touched more, frequently, his hand at her waist, her fingers brushing his arm. They sat closer on the couch during evening drinks. Once, when Victoria entered the room unexpectedly, Grant pulled Nia into a kiss that left her breathless and confused. Sorry, he murmured after Victoria left. She was watching through the doorway. It's fine, Nia said, her heart racing. Part of the job, but it didn't feel like a job anymore, that was the problem. Each touch, each shared glance, each private joke blurred the lines of their arrangement. Nia found herself looking forward to their evenings together, enjoyed making Grant almost smile with her observations. Worse, she caught herself watching him when he didn't notice, the way his brow furrowed in concentration, how his hands moved when he explained something he cared about, the rare moments when his guard dropped and she glimpsed the man behind the businessman. Victoria, meanwhile, watched them like a hawk, dropping casual comments designed to catch them in a contradiction. Grant, remember that villa in Tuscany where we stayed as children? You should take Nia there for a proper honeymoon. We agreed to postpone travel until Martha is fully recovered, Grant replied smoothly. Victoria turned to Nia. Has he taken you sailing yet? Grant practically lived on boats as a teenager. Not yet, Nia said, but he's promised to teach me this summer. It was exhausting, this constant vigilance, never knowing when Victoria might set another trap. But to Nia's surprise, she and Grant became a well-oiled machine, anticipating each other's responses, creating a shared history that felt almost real. One evening, after a particularly trying dinner with Victoria and some of her friends visiting, from London, Grant found Nia in the library. "You were brilliant tonight," he said, pouring himself a rare glass of scotch. "Even I almost believed we've been together for months." Nia looked up from her book. "Victoria is persistent. Does she always interrogate people like this?" "Only when she suspects something." Grant sat beside her on the couch. "Which is always. Our father taught her to look for weaknesses, just as he taught me." "Sounds like a lovely childhood," Nia said dryly. Grant's laugh was short and without humor. "Our father believed vulnerability was a fatal flaw. Victoria dealt with it by becoming the thing he feared: emotional, unpredictable, fully alive. I went the opposite direction. You shut everything down. I compartmentalized." Grant swirled the amber liquid in his glass. "It was more efficient." "And lonely," Nia said softly. Grant looked at her, really looked at her, in a way that made her breath catch. "Yes, but I never noticed until recently." Before Nia could respond, Victoria burst into the room. "There you are. I've had the most brilliant idea. Let's look at your wedding photos." Nia felt her stomach drop. There were no wedding photos. Their ceremony had been private, clinical, without celebration. Grant didn't miss a beat. "We haven't received them yet. The photographer is still editing," Victoria pouted. "Not even one for social media? No one even announced your marriage publicly. It's strange." "We wanted privacy," Grant said firmly. "So strange," Victoria repeated, studying them both, "almost as if you're hiding something." That night, as Nia prepared for bed, there was a knock at her door. She opened it to find Grant, still dressed in his evening clothes. "We have a problem," he said, entering her room and closing the door. "Victoria's been asking the staff questions about us." "What kind of questions?" "About our relationship, whether we share a bedroom." His expression was grim. "She's suspicious, and she won't let it go." Nia sat on the edge of her bed. "What do we do?" Grant ran a hand through his hair, a rare gesture of frustration. "We need to be more convincing. Victoria knows I've always kept my suite private, even from family. The fact that you and I maintain separate rooms is feeding her suspicion." Nia understood what he wasn't saying. "You think we should share a bedroom, just while she's here for appearance's sake?" Grant wouldn't meet her eyes. "I can sleep in the sitting area. You won't even know I'm there." The idea of Grant in her private space, even in another room, sent a flutter through Nia's stomach. "Fine, if you think it's necessary." "I do." He finally looked at her. "Thank you, Nia. I know this goes beyond our agreement. Well, I'm getting the better end of the deal, aren't I? My mother's healthy, living in your guest house with the best care money can buy. I can handle a roommate for a few days." Grant nodded, his expression unreadable. "I'll have some of my things moved in tomorrow. Victoria will notice." After he left, Nia lay awake for hours, wondering how she had gone from a business arrangement to sharing living quarters with a man who confused her more each day, a man who could be cold and distant one moment, then surprisingly thoughtful the next, a man she was beginning to care for, despite every rational thought telling her not to. The next day, Victoria noticed immediately when Nia emerged from Grant's master suite instead of her own room. "Well, well," she said, looking up from her coffee. "Finally decided to act like a real married couple?" Nia felt her cheeks warm. "We've always been a real married couple." "Of course you have." Victoria's smile was knowing. "I just find it interesting that after my arrival, suddenly you're sharing my brother's sacred private space, a place where even I wasn't welcome as a child." "People change, Victoria," Grant said, appearing behind Nia and placing a kiss on the top of her head. "Marriage changes priorities." Victoria watched them over the rim of her coffee cup. Apparently. That evening, when they retired to Grant's suite, the awkwardness was palpable. His living space was immaculate, minimalist but luxurious, with a massive bed dominating the bedroom. "I'll sleep on the couch in the sitting room," Grant said, gathering a pillow and blanket. "Don't be ridiculous, that couch is too small for you." Nia gestured to the king-sized bed. That thing could fit 4 people without them touching. We can share. Are you sure? We're adults, Grant, and technically we are married. In bed that night, with Grant a careful distance away on his side, Naya stared at the ceiling. Can I ask you something? His voice was deep in the darkness. Why did you really agree to our arrangement? Someone in your position could have hired the best immigration lawyers, found other solutions. The silence stretched so long she thought he might not answer. Efficiency, he said finally. A marriage was the fastest, most certain path. And when you walked into my office with your proposition, the timing was perfect. That's it, just convenience. Grant turned to face her, though she could barely make out his features in the dim light. Not entirely. There was something about you, your determination, your willingness to do anything for someone you loved. It was admirable. You mean it was useful? Both. He hesitated. Why are you asking? Nia sighed. I don't know. Sometimes I just wonder if any of this is real. The way you look at me in public, the things you say. You're very convincing. So, are you? But I'm not acting anymore, Nia said, the confession slipping out before she could stop it. That's what scares me. She felt Grant go still beside her. Nia, forget I said anything, she interrupted quickly. We should get some sleep. But sleep eluded her, even after Grant's breathing deepened. She had revealed, too, much crossed a line in their carefully constructed arrangement. How could she face him in the morning, knowing she had admitted developing real feelings in what was supposed to be a business transaction? So it seems the next day Grant was gone before Nia woke, leaving a note about early meetings. Relieved for the reprieve, she spent the morning with her mother at the guest house. You seem troubled, Martha observed as they sat in the garden. Her recovery was remarkable. She grew stronger each day. I'm fine, Mum, just tired. Martha fixed her with a knowing look. Is it Grant? Have you two had a disagreement? No, nothing like that. Nia sighed. It's complicated. Marriage usually is. Martha patted her hand. But I've seen the way he looks at you when he thinks no one's watching. Whatever the problem is, you can work it out. What do you mean, the way he looks at me? Martha smiled. Like you're a puzzle he can't solve. Like you fascinate him. Nia shook her head. You're imagining things. Am I? He's different around you. Less rigid, more human. Martha squeezed her daughter's hand. I may be old, but I know what love looks like when it's just beginning. Love. The word echoed in Nia's mind as she walked back to the main house. Was it possible that what she felt wasn't one-sided? That beneath Grant's controlled exterior, he might be experiencing the same confusion. She found Victoria in the main living room, surrounded by shopping bags. There you are, Victoria exclaimed. I've been having the most marvelous day spending. My brother's money. Care to see what I bought? Maybe later. Have you seen Grant? He called to say he'd be late. Some crisis at the office. Victoria studied Nia's face. Trouble in paradise? No, just a question about dinner, Nia lied. Victoria patted the couch beside her. Come sit with me, sister-in-law, let's chat. Warily, Nia complied. I've been watching you and my brother, Victoria said, her tone conversational, and something doesn't add up. What do you mean? Grant doesn't do love. He doesn't do emotion. He's exactly like our father in that way. Victoria leaned closer. So why, after 35 years of avoiding entanglements, would he suddenly marry a waitress with no connections, no money, and no strategic value to his empire? Kanyaf kept her expression neutral. Maybe he just fell in love. Victoria laughed. Please, my brother hasn't loved anyone since our mother died. He wouldn't recognize the emotion if it bit him. She tapped her manicured nails against a crystal glass. No, there's something else going on, and I intend to find out what it is. Why do you care so much? Because Kensington Enterprises is half mine, even if Grant likes to pretend otherwise. And I need to protect my interests. Victoria's smile turned predatory. Whatever game you're playing, whatever angle you're working, I will figure it out. There's no game, Victoria. I married Grant because I love him. The words felt true as Nia said them, startling her. "We'll see about that," Victoria replied. "Everyone has secrets, Naya, and secrets always come out eventually." That night, Naya waited up for Grant, determined to clear the air between them. But when he finally returned after midnight, his expression was closed, distant. "Is everything okay?" she asked as he loosened his tie. "Fine, just business." He wouldn't meet her eyes. "Victoria giving you trouble?" "She suspects something. She practically accused me of having an ulterior motive." Grant sighed. "Ignore her, she leaves in 2 days. She mentioned that half of Kensington Enterprises is hers." That got his attention. "What else did she say?" "That she needs to protect her interests." "Grant, what's going on?" He sat heavily on the edge of the bed. "My father left the company equally to Victoria and me, but with a condition. Control would go to whichever of us married and produced an heir first." Naya stared at him. "What? Why?" "My father believed family was the foundation of legacy. He wanted to ensure the Kensington line continued." Grant's laugh was bitter. Ironic, considering what a terrible father he was. "So, your marriage to me gives me controlling interest in the company, yes, at least temporarily." The revelation hit Naya like a physical blow. "That's why you agreed to our arrangement, not just for the green card, but to secure your company." She felt sick. "And you didn't think to mention this? It wasn't relevant to our agreement." "Wasn't relevant?" Naya's voice rose. "You're using me as a pawn in a game with your sister, and you didn't think that was relevant?" "I'm not using you," Grant said, standing. "Our arrangement is exactly as we agreed. A marriage of convenience that benefits us both. Except you failed to mention all the ways it benefits you." Naya grabbed her robe. "I need some air." "Naya, wait." But she was already out the door, hurrying down the corridor toward the garden. Outside, the night air was cool against her. Heated skin. She paced the stone path, trying to sort through her emotions. She felt betrayed, used. Yet beneath the anger was something else. Hurt. Hurt because she had begun to believe there might be something real developing between them. Hurt because she had allowed herself to care for a man who saw her as nothing more than a business opportunity. The sound of footsteps made her turn. Grant stood a few feet away, his face half in shadow. "I should have told you," he said quietly. "Yes, you should have. When you proposed our arrangement, I saw a solution to multiple problems. It was efficient." "Efficient," Nia repeated. "Is that all you care about? Efficiency and control and profit margins?" "It's all I've known how to care about." Grant took a step toward her. "Until recently." "What does that mean?" "It means I don't know what's happening to me." Another step closer. "It means I find myself thinking about you when I should be focusing on work. It means I look forward to coming home for the first time in my adult life." Nia's heart pounded. "Those are just words, Grant. I know. I'm not good at this, at feelings, at vulnerability. My father made sure of that." He was close enough now that she could see the conflict in his eyes. "But something's changed, Naya. You've changed me. How do I know this isn't just another performance, another strategy?" Grant reached for her hand, holding it gently. "Because I'm terrified right now. And Grant Kensington doesn't do fear. Despite herself." Nia smiled. "You're talking about yourself in the third person. See? Completely out of character." His thumb traced circles on her palm. "Our arrangement was supposed to be simple, clinical. I didn't expect to care for you. I didn't expect to want more than a business transaction." "What do you want, Grant?" "I want it to be real." His voice was barely audible. "All of it. The way I look at you, the things I say about you. I want it to be real." Nia studied his face, looking for signs of deception, but saw only vulnerability and hope. "I need time," she said finally. "This is a lot to process." Grant nodded, releasing her. "And I understand. For what it's worth, I'm sorry I didn't tell you everything from the beginning." As she watched him walk back to the house, Naya realized that somewhere along the way, the man she had agreed to marry for money had become someone entirely different. Someone capable of change, of growth, of feeling. Someone she could love if she dared to risk her heart again. The next morning, Naya woke to an empty bed and voices downstairs. Following the sound, she found Grant and Victoria in a heated argument in the study. "You can't be serious," Victoria was saying, "after everything he did to us." "It's a good business decision," Grant replied firmly, "and it's already done." Victoria noticed Naya in the doorway first. "Ah, the blushing bride. Did you know your husband just gave away half his fortune?" Naya looked at Grant questioningly. "Not half," he corrected. 20%. "And not gave away, invested." "In what?" Naya asked. Grant hesitated. "In a new foundation, the Martha Ellis Foundation for Medical Crisis Support." Naya stared at him, stunned. "What? You mentioned wanting to help families dealing with medical crises. The foundation will provide financial assistance, housing, and support services." Grant handed her a folder. "The paperwork was finalized this morning. You're the executive director if you want the position." Victoria threw up her hands. "This is what I'm talking about. The grant Cano would never do something so sentimental. What is happening to you?" Grant's eyes never left Naya's. "I'm changing, Victoria. People do that sometimes." "People? Yes. Not you." Victoria grabbed her purse. "I'm cutting my visit short. Call me when you've come to your senses." She stormed out, leaving them alone. Nya opened the folder with trembling hands. Inside were legal documents establishing the foundation with an initial endowment of $50 million. "Why?" she whispered. "Because you were right," Grant said simply. "About everything, about balance between profit and impact, about what matters." He took a deep breath. "And because I love you, Naya, not as part of our arrangement, not for appearances. I love who you are and how you've changed me." Naya closed the folder. "And the foundation? Is that to convince me? To buy my forgiveness?" "No, it's because it's the right thing to do. Because you had a dream and I have the means to make it reality." Grant stepped closer. "Whether you can forgive me or not, whether you can ever feel for me what I feel for you, the foundation is yours. No strings attached." Nya studied his face, looking for the calculating businessman she had first met. Instead, she saw only sincerity and vulnerability. "Our contract was for 1 year," she said slowly. "I know. But contracts can be renegotiated." Hope flickered in Grant's eyes. "What terms would you propose?" "No more secrets, no more separate lives under one roof, a real partnership, in every way." Nya took his hand. "And maybe no time limit." "Are you saying—" "I'm saying I love you too, you impossible man." Nya smiled through sudden tears. "I tried not to. I told myself it was just part of the act. But somewhere along the way, it became real for me too." Grant pulled her into his arms, holding her as if she might disappear. "I don't deserve this chance." "Probably not," Naya agreed, making him laugh. "But you're getting it anyway." When he kissed her, it wasn't for show, wasn't part of their performance. It was real, tender and passionate and full of promise. "What happens now?" Nia asked when they finally parted. "Now?" Grant smiled, a full, genuine smile that transformed his face. "Now we begin again, not as a business arrangement, but as a real marriage, if that's what you want." "It is," Naya said, realizing it was true. "But there's something else I want too." "Name it." "I want to finish my degree, run the foundation, make a difference." Grant nodded. "Done. Anything else?" Naya smiled, tracing the line of his jaw with her finger. "I want you to be happy, Grant Kensington, really, truly happy." "I already am," he said, pulling her close again. "For the first time in my life, I already am." 6 months later, Martha Ellis sat in the front row of the university auditorium, watching proudly as her daughter received her business degree. Beside her sat Grant, who cheered the loudest when Naya's name was called. The Martha Ellis Foundation was already helping dozens of families, with plans to expand nationally. Naya split her time between running the foundation and taking an increasingly active role in Kensington Enterprises, where her perspective had led to a new corporate responsibility initiative. Victoria had eventually come around, especially after seeing the positive press and goodwill generated by the foundation. She visited occasionally, bringing chaos and laughter to the once quiet mansion that now felt like a real home. As for Grant and Naya, their arrangement had evolved into something neither could have imagined that day in his office. a true partnership. Based on respect, trust, and love that grew stronger each day, what had begun as a transaction had become a transformation. Grant had learned that vulnerability wasn't weakness, but strength. Nya had discovered that sometimes the most unexpected choices lead to the greatest happiness. And together, they had found that some things couldn't be bought, sold, or negotiated. They could only be given freely, from the heart. The end.